Hi, I'm Mike Barltrop from WhatBinder.com, and today we're here to talk to Ed Greenwood. Ed, I'd just like to welcome you all the way from the Edverse. That's at the Edverse on Twitter. Ed's known as a very prolific writer, and apparently he's done a few things with Dungeons and Dragons. So I'd just like to thank you for stopping by and having this chat with us today.
Can you hear me? Good. Excellent. Hi. Hi. I'm a writer, and here I am. I'll start by saying any writing advice you get from anybody, including me, take with a grain of salt, because we're all different. Okay? So my secret perfect way of doing something might not work for you. But there are some basic things about writer's craft that you learn the hard way over the years. And so one of them is you guys are living in the best time to be a writer because you have this wonderful thing called a computer as opposed to typewriters. Meaning, if an idea comes to you, you can jot it down. You can put it in anywhere and you can move it around later. When I was a kid, the world was sepia. Never mind. When I was a kid, you had to type everything. Moving things around in a document was really difficult. So you guys are living in the dream age where if something occurs to you, you can just write it. You can be writing a physics assignment and you come up with a great idea for a scene, for a story, and you can just type it in, bing, and then move it later. So you are actually living in the most wonderful thing. And there are some tricks that work for me. And here's the big one. When you stare at a blank white screen or a blank white piece of paper, you're going to blink first. You can stare at that white thing thinking, how do I make great story come out of this? And it's not going to help you. But it is a lot easier to fix something that is sitting in front of you than to make something up that you out of nothing. And the best way to do that is if you're writing and you finish a scene or you finish a chapter, the instinct, the human nature instinct is to just stop. Save, I'm done. I can pick this up tomorrow. Let's find something to eat. Here's the trick. Start the next chapter. Start the next scene. Write a couple lines. Even if it's garbage, even if you know you're going to change it tomorrow, it's easier to jump on something that is already written and expand on it, fix it, change it, than it is to stare at a blank screen and start something. So for those of you who have a hard time starting, just jump in anywhere. If you're my age and you grew up with typewriters, there is this horrible ingrained tendency to write chronologically. Start at the beginning, write your way through the story to the end. And that's the most logical way to do it. It's the easiest way to keep track of everything you've done in the narrative so far. But the joy of computers, the benefit you have by doing it right now, is you can literally jump in anywhere. You can write the big climax scene, the big fight, the big denouement. You can write it right away first, and then you can construct the story around it. Or if an idea comes to you for a really funny line or in the middle of writing a really tragic death scene, you can just write the funny line down and move it later. Don't ever worry about getting things in order. Just do that. Pour it out onto the page. This is how I got through high school. I poured everything out onto the page. And you can do it too. So, what would you most like me to talk about? What can I be of most help to you guys?
So, One question that people have been having is, how did you go from what you were before to what you are today? How did you transition to becoming a writer, which is something that you are incredibly well known for?
um, I was 6 at the time, so I hadn't really thought about whether I was going to be a writer. I just wrote. You see, um, my father's den was crammed full of books. Like most people who collect books, he built his own bookshelves so that he could sort them by size to cram in the maximum number of books. And it was full of all sorts of stuff, from advanced radio source physics theses to wartime pulp paperbacks that were falling apart. Give one to a friend in uniform. And I was forever pounding up the stairs with a really lurid paperback saying, Dad, this was great. Where's the next one? And my father would always say something along the lines of, well, son, that author died in 1936. So if you want any sequels, you're going to have to write them yourself. I'd say, okay. And I go running back downstairs to the den. And my Aunt Clara had done what all farm women of that era did. You saved all your brown paper bags from the supermarket because there were no plastic bags back then. And you slit them neatly up the sides with your kitchen cleaver, and then you ironed them on the ironing board so they were flat. And then you handed them to the children. If you weren't running a farm and didn't need to jot down farm financial figures, you handed them to the children to crayon on and write on. So I went down to my stack of brown paper and I started writing sequels to all of these pulp adventure stories, which was really good because although the sequels were really bad, I was learning style. I was learning to copy other writers' styles. I was learning what I liked and what I could pull off and what I couldn't, which is another of the secrets of writing. The more input you have, the more you read, the more of other people's stuff you read, and all sorts of stuff, not just what you like or what's favorite, but reading textbooks. If you don't like romances, read a romance. You don't have to read all of it. A couple pages will do. You dig into somebody else's writing style and see how they pulled off a scene. When they ended a scene and jumped to the next scene, what was the transition like? Did it work for you or not? Stuff like that. You just sort of read what other people do and go, okay, or I can do that. And that's how I learned to be a writer. I was 6 years old. I wasn't thinking about it. I was just writing stories to entertain myself. And guess what? Writers write. You can't stop us. You might stop us getting published, and many, many people never finish the big stories they want to tell. They never get to the end of their novel because they let life get in the way. But writers just write. You can't stop us.
So this is a big question, and there probably isn't a single answer to it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What's your favorite book of all time?
I don't have one. I have about 40 favorites. I love The Lord of the Rings. I love Tigana and A Song for Our Bond by Guy Kay. I love The Face and the Frost by John Bellairs. I love a lot of Lord Dunsany's writing. There are tons and tons of favorites. I can't pick just one. That's like saying, who's your favorite friend? I don't know. Ask me 5 minutes from now, you might get a different answer than I give you right now.
So having written hundreds of books and showing no sign of slowing down, how is it that you actually manage that? How many hours do you find yourself writing every day? And what's the most challenging part of all of that?
Oh boy. Well, it's like this. Usually around 12 to 16 hours. Because I have a full-time day job. I'm busy with life. And yet the ideas just keep coming, and the projects I'm working on with lots of other people, so they're depending on me to get them done. So I just sit down, turn on the computer again, and write some more. It varies. Sometimes, some days it'd be as little as 12 hours. Some days it'd be as much as 16. Yes, I said 12 to 16 hours. You don't have to put in that much time. Any day that you write something is a good day. It's not an arms race. Everybody writes at different paces. Tolkien wrote, J.R.R. Tolkien, author of The Lord of the Rings, he was a lecturer at Oxford in linguistics. He wrote every day, but he didn't necessarily write about his pet projects. The Lord of the Rings was a pet project. It wasn't his work. What topics do I find most challenging to write? Something I don't know about. You know the old truism, write what you know? This truism is of limited use to people like me who write genre fiction, because we don't live in a world where whiz-bang spells actually work and magic swords are being toted around by people. And if you're writing science fiction, we don't actually live in a federation of planets with faster than light space travel and space pirates and all that stuff. And if we write murder mysteries, we hopefully don't live in a world where every time people get together in a house for a weekend, somebody starts bumping people off in a mysterious and strange fashion for leaving weird clues around for people. Hopefully that doesn't happen in your real life. So I find it most difficult if I have to write something that hinges on details of math or physics, because the one thing I was really bad at in school was math. My father was a physicist, so he used to just seethe in frustration that I couldn't brilliantly come up with the answer to a huge long quadratic equation off the top of my head. And I would just stare at the symbols and go, I don't know. I really don't know. Makes no sense to me. So if I have to write something that hinges on a detail of that, and I have to do the research and get it right, that's the hardest for me to write. It's sometimes fun, because the best way to take care of it is to sit down and discuss it with a friend who does know what they're talking about. So the actual sitting down and, pre-COVID, making a date to go to a restaurant, buying a meal for them so you can pump them about ideas, that's fun. But it is more work. So those are the things I least like, because it slows me down. I'm trying to pump out a novel in a week, and if I have to stop and research things, it's going to take a lot longer. So those are the things I don't like as much. Running a sci-fi, yeah, basically I do write in sleep, except that I live in the real world. I actually pay all the bills. I do all the shopping. I do my own taxes, blah, blah, blah. Which novel of mine was the most enjoyable to write? My usual flippant answer to that is the one I'm working on right now. Okay? Because some of them were enjoyable for different reasons. Some of them were collaborations, and I got to work with a friend, and it was fun for that reason. Some novels, this is rare, they almost write themselves. You sit down, and the stuff just pours out, and it's easy, and you get up from the keyboard 3 days later and you've got a finished novel. That's a delight, but it's a rare delight.
So, speaking about not actually being able to experience everything authentically and still having to create things based on that, as I mentioned, you are somewhat known for tabletop role-playing games. If someone were going to run a science fiction campaign, what do you think they could do to make it an authentic experience?
Here's the thing. You try and figure out who you're doing the campaign for, what style of play they like. Do they like to blow things up? Do they like to kill people? Do they like to have a lot of discussions and intrigue? Do they like to solve mysteries? Whether they like to solve mysteries or not, put a mystery in there, because everybody does love a mystery. And it will give them something to solve and something to think about. And then give them something interesting to do, their characters something to do that has an immediate reward. So we get some wish fulfillment, because the one thing you do in role-playing games is the stuff you can't do in real life. Perhaps in real life, you're not the prettiest kid in the class. You can't leap tall buildings with a single bound. You can't pull off something and get rich. So give them the chance to do those things in play. And whether or not they actually make it or not, they had the chance. It feels good to have the chance because real life doesn't afford us all the chances we want.
So in your writing, you have to have ideas. And ideas can come from all over the place. Do you find yourself listening to people in the supermarket and grabbing some ideas from there? Do you find yourself taking snippets of what you overhear as you walk down the street? Or are there some things that you think about when you're playing some board games or watching a television show that eventually find their way into any of your works?
I'm very influenced, but I'm not directly influenced. Unless somebody says something that is a really nice quip, you're never going to take a line that you hear somebody else say and put it directly into a book. Okay? And aside from that, I'm not directly putting things in what teachers call plagiarism. Does not happen because what you're doing is experiencing everything in life and just filing it away for later. And your subconscious starts to work on stories that you are working on right now. And all of a sudden, an idea will pop into your head. And it didn't come from nowhere. It came from your mind working away on something. And an idea occurs to you. What if that pretty girl that he glimpses for a moment at the drive-through when she's handing him his hamburger, what if she's a spy? Oh yeah, that would change the story. And so you quickly jot that down, which means in I'm old school. I grew up BC before computers. So in my pocket, I always have a small folder that has 2 or 3 pencils because pens always leak or they freeze or they dry up. So I have a pencil, a sharp pencil. Little golf pencils work for me, but it can be anything you want, and a notepad of paper. That means if my phone is dead or my tablet's dead or for whatever reason it won't work, I can just still jot the idea down before I lose it. So often I will jot something down that makes no sense at all to somebody else. It'll say things like bright reds through the window. But to me, it captures a thought or idea so that when I can get back to my computer, down it goes. I saw a question in the chat. What's your writing space like? Well, all writing spaces I have, and I have 6 of them built in around the house. That's the nice thing about owning your own house. I also have 300,000 books in this house. So my writing space is crammed with books. And my father used to call it the 1 foot rule. And what he meant was your dictionary or your thesaurus should be within 1 foot of your keyboard or your typewriter, so you can reach out with your hand like I'm doing now, and it would come back with the right book. So you have a number of crucial books that you have within reach. Your writing space should also have, and you can't see it here because of my cute little webcam, but there is actually a desk space off to my right because I am juggling 8 projects at any one time. And these 8 projects all need pieces of paper with stuff on them, whether they're contracts or I'm working on a medieval Dublin. And I'm doing it city block by city block right now for another gaming project. So I'm hand drawing the city blocks and then I key them. And then I sit at the computer and detail who lives in every building and what their story is. So I need a horizontal workspace, but other people will be different. Other people might not want or might not have a workspace they can leave undisturbed. You might do all your writing on your bed, on a tablet, or lounging around in a chair. And maybe you're renting space or maybe you're living with your parents or whatever, and you don't have a space that you can leave without your mom coming along and tidying it up and all your papers have gone because she tidied them to wear. So you might not have the same conditions that I have, but the luxury for me is I can leave everything lying around. And I like to be comfortable. And comfortable for me, particularly if I'm talking to you for hours, is to have something I can wet my whistle within reach, and in my case, a fan. So I have a little desk fan that blows on me, and I always have writing materials. I always have a calendar, and I have my computer. And I have, when I say I have my computer, at my computer desk, there are 6 computers. One of them is a printer slave. One of them is my main workhorse. I have different computers at different eras because I do game writing. And one of the things you will encounter when you're running game writing is a game will only run on the platform it was designed for. So if you're trying to do a sequel to Skyrim, The Elder Scrolls, you may discover you're turning on a 10-year-old computer to run the original because you don't want to run it under emulation. You want to run the original. Or I may want to turn on my computer with a giant screen. You guys are writing Pick a Path or Choose Your Own Adventure books, the equivalent of that. Well, if you're doing those professionally, because it's going to be storyboarded and somebody else is going to draw the illustrations and they're going to lay the book out and they're going to want 1 or 2 pages that you go back to again and again. If you open the chest, turn to 38A. And 38A will say, if you came here from 16B, go to 53A. If you came here from 28B, so you have these nodes. Well, you actually draw a story tree. Now, in the old days, that meant kitchen table, big sheet of paper. And if you didn't have a big sheet of paper, you took 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper like this one, and you taped about 20 of them together. And then you drew the story tree. Well, now that we're down in, modern living and computers, you draw it on the screen, which if you're doing a story tree for anything more than the simplest of Choose Your Own Adventures, rapidly means you run out of real estate. So you'd use your giant monitor. So that's what my workspace looks like, just because that is what suits my needs. And I've been doing this long enough that I have the money to set things up the way I want. But guess what? You don't need any of that. You can do it with that little pad of paper you stick in your pocket. These other things just make it more convenient and means you can work faster. And time is money. That's the one life lesson you will learn through life. Guess what? The one thing you can never have back is time. So if you're lying there with your headphones on, listening to music, and hours are passing, that's time you can never have back. Just remember that as you go through life. If you waste time, I'll get to that assignment. I don't want to do that assignment, so I'll do it next weekend. I want to watch this thing first. Guess what? Your life will slip away and you didn't do anything. So time is the most precious thing, not money. When you're young, you think it's money because you don't have any and you want to get some. But later on, you discover it's time. Time you can never have back. Well, we're all inside sheltering from COVID, and we're not out shopping in stores, and we're not out at our workplaces working. That production time is permanently lost. We can't have the time back. Dun, dun, dun.
Now, you started writing in the pen and paper age, or the pencil and paper age in your case, but you transitioned to computers. And since then, digital technology has gotten more and more advanced, and there have been more changes. Are there any specialized apps or programs that you find yourself using that would be helpful for writers to know about? What is it that you use?
There are a whole bunch of special programs. I don't own any of them because usually I'm working with a Hollywood studio or a major New York publisher, and they are working with their program. So they share a Google Doc with me, or they share the screen, and I'm working on whatever platform they're using. Because it doesn't matter what I buy, they will be using something else. If I buy Zoom, they'll be using Google Meeting. If I buy Google Meeting, they'll be using Zoom. Or, Intelligent Exchange or one of these proprietary ones. So anything I buy will be the wrong thing. So I save time and money by not buying anything. Because I'm a writer, I have to use Microsoft Word because that's become the industry standard. Warning to all of you, students or otherwise, Microsoft Word is not a page layout program. You can fake it by spacing and tabbing and so on, but never ever do that in a professional document because it will drive editors bananas when they find your Microsoft Word doc in which you've centered something because you learned on typewriters. So you've spaced your way across the page to put greatest story ever written by Ed Greenwood in the middle, because they have to undo all that formatting and strip it out, and they will curse you in their heart of hearts, maybe directly to your face if you happen to be too close. So do not try and use Microsoft Word for page layout, except to do school stuff, because in school stuff is usually simple enough. You're just trying to make the cover page look legible for whoever's reading. Whoever has to read 46 assignments. Haha. And by the way, do not use cute fonts that look like cursive handwriting or something, because again, the poor teacher has to read 36 of them, and the poor teacher is not going to regard you fondly when they're on assignment number 34 and it's yours and you decided to write it in red ink in a cursive typeface. They're just going to go, my eyes, ah! Who wrote this? So anyway, there are conventions for everyone you're working with, and you follow them. So in my case, I haven't had to use a particular specialty program and settle on it. I just use whatever they're using. There are quite a few of them that do flowcharts. You know, those lovely things. They can also do a genealogical family tree. You know, King Richard I, the Lionheart. Who did he marry? In his case, nobody. How many children did he have? In his case, nobody. Oh, but these nobles had all these children and they intermarried down here. So there are many programs that draw those beautifully. And the best thing to do when you're approached with a need for one of these programs is to look around and see what other people have done and what they're using. You can check online. Many people will be actually doing YouTube videos showing you as they work on something, and you look at it and go, oh, I sort of like that. Oh, that looks easy. Or, ooh, I don't like that, how way that looks. And you make your decision accordingly. So I don't use any special tech. There are some things, if you're writing Hollywood scripts, there are some, Save the Cat is one of the ones that is sold to the home user that formats stuff for Hollywood scripts in the right formats that they like and allows you to put layers of notes on it. But guess what? All the big screenwriters that I've worked with, we all learned on typewriters, so you can do it without. I wrote my first couple Hollywood scripts on typewriters. I carry a notebook in my pocket because although I own a cell phone, I do not own a smartphone. My phone is an old-fashioned flip phone. It makes and takes phone calls. And it's my emergency phone if the car breaks down in the middle of the Canadian wilds somewhere. So I can phone and say, hi, I need a tow. I can't even make or take texts on this phone. It's lovely. That's how I get all my work done. I don't live on a phone. I live on a computer and write instead. And I know there are people who live on their phones and they have grown up using their phones. I'm not one of them. And I will never suffer a power failure. I will never drop and break my phone and be unable to write the next sentence. As long as my eyeballs work and there's enough light for me to see. And by the way, I have woken up in the middle of the night, rolled over, picked up a pencil from my bedside table and written on the bedside table because I know I left a pad on top of it. And I can't see what I'm writing because it's pitch dark and I don't want to wake my wife. And guess what? In the morning, I look at the pad of paper and I can read what I wrote in the middle of the night. It hasn't been lost. So I'm old school just because I didn't see a reason to change. It's not that I'm a Luddite. I am a Luddite, but that isn't the reason. When it became advantageous to change what I used, I changed without any resistance. But there are some things that work actually better. I find that most people, their phones take over their lives. And um, as far as I'm concerned, I have used an Apple iPhone for a week when I was on assignment, and there were two really cool apps on it. Shazam, where you hold it up and somebody's playing music and you hold it up and the phone identifies the song. That was really cool. And there was another little app that turned it into a spirit level. So you put your phone sideways and it tells you whether the surface it's on is level or not with a little bubble, just like it. I thought, oh, those are really cool. And then, of course, like everybody else, I could make the phone turn into a flashlight by just putting on its white screen and going really bright. That was useful. Other than that, no need to use them. Because for me, I want to spend the time writing, or I want to spend the time hanging out with friends or family, living. I don't want to spend the time with my nose buried in the phone. I particularly don't want to spend it on the 401 driving at high speed in heavy traffic when the people around me are all checking their phones instead of driving.
So we all have a lot going on in our lives, especially these days. How is it that you have time to get any of your writing done at all?
Uh okay, my answer to that is going to be most useful to me, okay? Remember what I said earlier about, pinch of salt and everybody's different? So this may not work for you. But one of the tricks when you're a writer, and sometimes you'll hear writers talk about writer's block and how they bog down on something. Guess what? We all bog down on things we don't really want to do. So if you have a giant assignment in biology and your giant assignment requires you to look into the sex life of the chimpanzee, and you really don't want to go to the zoo, crawl under a chimpanzee to look at their sex organs and then write something about it. If that really doesn't turn your crank, you're going to put it off and you're going, oh, I'll get to it. I don't want to do it now. And then you'll have to do it in a rush at the last minute or even be late. We procrastinate things we don't really want to do. That's just human nature. One of the ways around it when you're a writer is to have 6 or 7 projects on the go at all times. And projects that are different. So if you're writing a huge tragic novel in which everybody in the castle is going to murder everybody else before the end of the book, so you're writing Game of Thrones, okay? But if you want to write a little P.G. Wodehouse funny story that's about 3 pages long, that can be a project you're working on at the same time. So when you bog down on the one, you jump to the other. And if you have 3 or 4 projects on the go, and guess what? All students who are in high school, this is easy for you. You always have too many assignments handed to you because you have more than one teacher. You're taking more than one course or topic at a time. So you're always getting stuff loaded on you. You really don't want to do, but you have to. And they're all different. You can do the same thing with writing projects. If you're writing something that is a play, but you also decide to write something that's nonfiction. Say you open an issue of Toronto Life magazine and say, I could write a nonfiction article like this one, this article on this serial killer, or this article on this realtor who's made a career in, say, the Annex or in Forest Hill. I could write something like that. And you start writing something like that. And then at the same time, you were writing a Harlequin romance. And at the same time, you're writing a James Bond type thing. And whenever you bog down on one, you jump to the other. That works like a charm for me. I mean, some people will say, oh, I can't split my brain into that. You're not really splitting your brain. You're turning from one to the other. In the same way that you can have a buffet, well, not during COVID, but when COVID is not going on, you can go to a restaurant that has a buffet and you walk up to the buffet. You don't go, oh no, I don't know what to do. I'm hungry, but there's so many choices. I have to stop right here. No, you grab something and you grab something else and you grab something else. And pretty quickly your plate is full and you go back to your table and eat it. You don't go, oh my goodness, look at all the stuff I can't possibly choose. You just jump into what you want. And the same thing, that's what you do when you're writing. You jump from one project to the other, so you never bog down. And you never feel bad about yourself Like if you let one of those assignments you don't want to do slide and you know it's going to be due in a few days, you know it's getting later, you start to feel bad about it. You start to feel a little guilty, or, oh, am I going to have to pull an all-nighter? This is going to be terrible. But if you're every day you're working on something, even if you just get a paragraph or a line written, you feel good. Okay, I got that done. Cool, I got that done. Feel good about myself. Oh, that was cool. Oh, I got this other idea. That worked. That's wonderful. Jump to this next one. So you feel much better about yourself. It's self-care when you're actually producing stuff.
Having so many projects on the go at once must be a challenge for you. I assume that you are planning things to keep everything straight in your mind, or you're not planning anything at all and just going for it, putting everything down as it comes to you. So my question is, what strategies work best for you? Are you the type of person who plans everything out ahead of time, or do you just go with it?
Um, if I was left to my druthers, if it was just me, I would be planning nothing and just having fun writing. I just sit down and let the characters take it where they took it. This would probably lead to long, shapeless stories that needed lots of fixing, but I would have a lot of fun. However, the real answer to your question, because I'm doing all sorts of different professional writing, is I do it however the client or the publisher or my collaborator, if I'm collaborating, how they want to do it. I mean, I've published over 400 books. I've tried just about every way you can do things over the years. But the long and short of it is, if you're writing for particular markets, they have particular expectations. So for instance, if I'm writing for a major New York publishing house, they either want a finished book and their editor will read it. So it really doesn't matter how I produced it. The editor will read it and decide whether or not they want to publish it. And if they do want to publish it, what little changes they want me to make to it. Or they're going to need a full outline. So it doesn't matter if I don't want to plan the book at all beforehand. I have to. And some people's full outlines, and again, this depends on what the editor's expecting. I have collaborated on Hollywood work in which the outline said, this is the tried and true story of two rival families, bracket Romeo and Juliet, bracket, in which two star-crossed lovers evolve as the families kill each other. They will murder their way through the book. There will be huge fights. And at the end, we have a tragic star-crossed lovers. Or we pull it out, depending on what the movie is. And that's the outline. You go, that's not an outline. That's encapsulating the story in 3 sentences. That's not really an outline. And I've actually been told by editors, oh no, I need a chapter breakdown outline, chapter by chapter. And I have collaborated on a major New York Times bestseller in which the middle chapters, chapter 56, more fighting. Chapter 57, big battle. Chapter 58, more fighting. Zoblob dies. That was the outline. It was like, what? Because each of those chapters is 3,500 to 5,000 words that we're making up from that outline. More fighting. Okay, I can more fight for 5,000 words, but you see what I mean? It's not really an outline. And other people's outlines, and if I'm left on my own and I'm asked to outline something, my outlines tend to be this way. They have dialogue in them. So they're actually what a theater director would call blocking. For those of you who haven't taken theater, blocking can be said formally in many ways, but it really comes down to moving bodies around a stage for the dramatic effect. So if you read a scene in Shakespeare, it'll say, exeunt, pursued by a bear, or something like that, or enter Holinshed. But where does Holinshed come onto the stage, and how does he come on? Does he come running on with a sword drawn? Does he come running on out of breath and looking behind him as if he's being chased? Does he stroll on, drinking a daiquiri? You see, all of these things set up the scene, and that's blocking. So my outlines have blocking in them, and they have key dialogue, like the really killer lines in a Hollywood movie. In the middle of The Princess Bride, I've got something to tell you. I'm not left-handed either. You know, those killer moments, you know, Luke, I am your father. You know, those lines would actually be in the outline, because to me, they are essential for the reader of the outline to figure out what I'm trying to do in the scene. So I would have to put in a full outline. And sometimes for a 300-page novel, my outline would be 100 pages long. So I'm practically writing the story in the outline. And many publishers require this. So the answer to your question is whatever the project requires. But if I was left to myself, I would just start writing and let the characters, again, it would be focused on interesting characters, and they would tell the story. And it would become obvious to me as I was working on it, oh, now so-and-so is going to do a pratfall. Now so-and-so is going to start a fight. Now so-and-so is going to storm out because they didn't get what they wanted. So they're going to leave, and they're going to try and come back later when they can get what they want or something. And I would just let the story tell itself, because that's more fun. That is more fun, but it might not get the book written as fast. And it definitely doesn't work if you're writing a plot-driven thriller novel like a James Bond, where you're racing through action scenes. In my druthers, I'd rather write P.G. Wodehouse type comedy, where somebody says, "Oh, plover's eggs. I didn't know we could get plover's eggs this time of year. Throw me a plover's egg." Splat. "Oh, you didn't cook them." You know, that sort of thing. I'm just having fun with the characters.
When you first started writing at a very young age, did it just start as a hobby for you? And when you found yourself transitioning over to being a professional author, how did that change your relationship with the craft of writing?
It started just to entertain myself. I was 6 years old, and I was writing, as I said earlier, sequels to things that I liked in my father's den. Just entertain myself. What happened next? Literally, the story ends. What happens to those characters next? Well, there is no sequel. The author's dead. If I want to write, if I want to find out what happened next, I have to write it myself. So that's how I started. My father actually took some of my early writings to his buddies at work. He worked in Canada's defense establishment during the Cold War, doing missile guidance and so on. So he'd be passing around my pulp adventure stuff for the guys at work. And they'd say, "Oh, this is fun. Hey, Bob, have them write some more." So my dad would come back and say, "They want to know more about, this character." "Oh, okay." So I'd sit down and write something. So it was literally for fun. My first things that I got published were short stories. I was about 7 years old then. And then I discovered you could get paid for writing. Bonus! This meant I could buy books. I had spending money. So, and then I managed to publish a novel, and $5,000 was a lot of money back then. I mean, I'm 61 years old. I mean, so back when I was 7 years old, that was quite a while ago, and that had $5,000 has the buying power of about $25,000 today. So when I discovered that, you do this thing that's fun, you take about half a year to noodle away in your spare time, because I was in school, so I was doing school assignments with most of my time. And by the way, it felt really good mentally. Whenever you had a particularly stupid or boring school assignment, you'd say, but never mind. I will get to write another chapter of the novel when I'm finished this. So I will do the school assignment, get it out of the way, and then write my fun stuff that really matters and is much better. And you would sit down and do it. So it actually felt good. So by the end of half a year, I'd finish something and I'd mail it off, and somebody else would mail back a contract. And when I signed it, I would only have to wait a mere 90 days and I would get $5,000. Wow, this is great. I could buy myself a car. So I did. This is so cool. You make stuff up for a living. Where do I sign? When can I do this full time? So that's how it changed. And then the hard way, but gently, it changed in that people said, no, 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 no. We're not paying secretaries in our secretarial pool to input all your typewritten manuscripts anymore. We're going computerized. So you need a computer. So instead of saying, I'm paying you $5,000 for the next book, we're going to send you a Mac computer. You're going to write on this Mac computer. You're going to send us the diskettes. And if you don't, we're not going to publish them. We're not even going to open them. Oh, okay. So and by the way, we want them double spaced because our editors need to write stuff in the margins. Oh, and by the way, and one thing at a time, they taught me what they wanted in the way of format. And then I got used to the fact that everybody wanted something slightly different in format. And if I wanted to work with this set of people or that set of people, I just had to jump through their particular hoops. So I learned that way. And by then I was off and running. I wasn't caught in the classic writer's trap of writing stuff and then trying to find an agent, and then the agent sending it off to umpteen publishers and not hearing back or just getting rejections. I was never, ever in that time waste. I was always churning out new stuff constantly. And here we are, 5 decades later, I'm still doing it, which just goes to show that I am insane and stubborn. That's the other trick to being a writer. Be stubborn. I think the polite way of referring it to is persistent, tenacious, keep at it. This is the same with everything in life. If you give up after 5 seconds, I didn't like win the jackpot after 5 seconds, I give up. No, you'll never get anywhere. You have to keep at something that you like. If you like doing it, you like writing, and you want to tell a story, keep at it. Get it done. And then you do that, and then there's no problems. You are a success. It only took you most of your life. Don't worry about it. That's more than most people achieve in their lives. So don't worry about it. Just do it.
Now, representation in writing has often been limited, especially in fantasy and science fiction. But representation in writing has always been important to you. You've spoken about it a number of times, and it's extremely evident in your own writing. How have you seen representation change over the last few decades since you've started writing?
The best way to see yourself reflected as the protagonist or main character of a story has always been to write it yourself. So if you open a fantasy novel and it's full of old white guys doing things to other old white guys, that's usually because old white guys wrote it. And that's nobody's fault. That happened. None of you guys, I'm talking to the students now, not your teacher. None of you guys are old enough to know what the world was like post Second World War. I was born in the 50s. I grew up in the 60s. All of our teachers, most of our elected officials, all of our policemen, doctors, etc., were old white guys, because after the war, all the people who survived and who'd fought in the war or served and came home, and they had to find jobs. So this huge pool of them took all the jobs, and they hadn't died of old age yet. They were still around, albeit reaching retirement age, when I was a young student. And so we were dominated by old white guys. Now, the underpaid professions, and I started working in public libraries because, hey, you get to work with books. Now, Librarians, that was a woman's profession. So there were only 2 men in the building. The library I work in right now, I'm the only male they've ever hired since 1759 when the library started. All my coworkers, my bosses are all women. And over the years, as Canada became more and more of a destination for immigration from other countries in the Commonwealth, you started to see people with different skin colors all around you. And I happened to grow up in Don Mills, which was a very rich Toronto, well, North York at the time, a suburb. But in those days, we had the Auto Pact. We didn't have a free trade deal. So all foreign companies had to have little branch plant Canadian operations. So if you were a German engineering giant like Siemens, you had Siemens Canada. Well, a lot of them had corporate headquarters in Toronto. And a lot of the executives lived in Don Mills for 2 or 3 years. They'd be parachuted in to live with their wives and families. They would run the company, and then they'd move on to somewhere else in the same company, and somebody else would come in and run the Canadian. So when I went to school, it was like a United Nations. We had people from all over the world. So that it didn't seem unusual to me to have classmates of all skin colors, all cultures, both genders. And I'll tell you what, when you're that age, more of the girls in class are more eloquent than most of the guys in class anyway. They want to talk up. They put themselves forward. They accomplish stuff. So they became the leaders when we were doing class projects. We were working together. So I expected out in the workplace to have women as bosses. And sure enough, working in a library, I did. So I naturally grew up thinking, okay, if you need something done, something difficult done, the woman will always know. They're the competent ones. So that I started putting into my fiction because that was what seemed normal to me. And that's the old write what you know. And it just seems odd to me that other people thought differently. But that it's not that odd because that's what our stories are rooted in. The differences between how people think and act, the positions they take. And any story is essentially about conflict. And if you're not going to reduce the conflict to man fights monster, monster bad, monster going to eat man if man doesn't kill monster first. If you're moving up from that level, then all the conflict is either going to be physical conflict, like people hitting each other, shooting each other, stabbing each other, whatever, or it's going to be the clash of ideas, the clash of I want something, you want something, only one of us can have it, it's going to be me, or whatever, and so you want your stories to be rooted in conflict. So you're going to have people with different agendas and different wants clashing with each other, but you don't have to turn it into simplified racism, as in white on black or whatever, or man on woman. You want to make everything different. That's what makes stories interesting, having characters different and having characters that are multi-leveled and faceted. It's fun to write a mustache twirling villain, but if that's all the character is, a guy with a top hat who ties ladies to railroad tracks, okay. No, he's a lot more interesting if he also has a pet cat that he really likes. And by the way, he's got this great recipe for goldfish. So that's why he steals goldfish out of kids' fish tanks, because he's going to eat them. Why would he do that? Okay, he's already way more interesting than when we started talking about him because he's got more layers to him. You want all your characters to be that way. So the more diverse characters are, if you're writing a murder mystery, immediately it's a better mystery because you know that the author isn't going to go, see that black person over there? They're the villain automatically. No, anybody in the story can be the villain. Anybody in the story can be the murderer. So all of a sudden your narrative is way more interesting. And it's also more like real life. And we feel better because actually, when you're telling a story, one of the things in the story, even if the story is full of horrible things happening, a fight to save the world, to save the universe, you want to have characters that you want to spend time in the company of. The most enduring franchises, the most enduring fictional series, it's because we want to open another book or go and pay money to see another movie to see our favorite characters do things again. We've just seen this phenomenon of the Mandalorian and Baby Yoda. Well, those are rooted in people wanting to see what happens next to those characters because the characters are attractive. The background they already know. Oh yeah, it's the universe. Lots of different planets. Guys in spaceships shooting each other out of the sky. Yeah, we've done that. We've done that in what, 12 movies now? 14 movies. So that's old hat. What's new is these particular characters.
Now, a lot of people are frightened when trying to get published for the first time. You started writing at such a young age and in such a unique way. Did you ever actually experience any of that fear? And what tips do you have for people looking to get their works out there into the world?
Everything felt possible. I didn't even have those fears. I was just writing as fast as I could to keep up with the demand. And I started writing for Dragon magazine, and I wrote a monster and I sent it off. And 2 weeks later, I got a little postcard in the mail saying your thing has been accepted. And I wrote a second monster on the strength of that. 16 days after I mailed it, my issue of Dragon came back to me, my new issue with my monster in it. I thought, oh, they're desperate for monsters. They must have opened the mail, saw my monster, input it right away so the issue could go out the door and be printed. They're desperate for monsters. So I wrote a whole pile of them. You see, I never had that problem. And so fear was not something I ever had to deal with, and neither was rejection for the longest time. I never had anything come back. So I am unusual in that I got spoiled, in that a lot of the hurdles that people face getting into publishing, where they try and shop a novel for years and they send it unsolicited and it just goes to the slush pile and then gets form rejected, not suitable for our needs at this time, which tells you nothing. Or they had to fight to get an agent, because we don't look at manuscripts that aren't repped by agents. They usually just use the word unsolicited, but it means the same thing in this context. I never had to worry about that. These days, guess what? None of you students have to worry about it either, because you can self-publish. That was not a route open to the vast majority of us when I started writing. There were gatekeepers. Unless you owned your own pulp and paper mill and had lots of trees to cut down, you couldn't make your own paper. You couldn't publish. And even if you could, you couldn't get into the distribution network. Now, anybody can publish their own ebook, or they can publish through Amazon. And if they jump through Amazon's hoops, Amazon will actually set up print on demand editions so that your book can be published and look as good as most of the major offerings from the major publishers. And therefore, you don't have to deal with all of the time delays at the beginning. However, the flip side of it is, now that everybody can get published, everybody is getting published. So instead of being one of 6 people on the stage in major Canadian literature at any time, and back when I was a kid, Farley Mowat, Pierre Burton, there were about 5 writers that could dominate, because that was all there was room for in the market at any one time. Now, being a writer is sort of like being at Jurassic Park when the Raptors are playing in the playoffs. The sea of thousands of people. Now imagine if all of those thousands of people were all holding up a book saying, "Hey, here's my latest book I wrote." And they're all doing it at once. And you can't be heard in the crowd because there are too many people holding up books and yelling, "Buy your book here. It's great. It's really good. It's the best thing I wrote today." If everybody's doing that at once, you don't stand out. And that is the problem for writers today, which is why being active on social media and branding yourself and doing something outrageous in public so that you get noticed can be a way to sales, or at least to get noticed. So it's a completely different world than what I started in. So I never had those fears. My fear was, can I stay awake long enough to finish the next chapter? Because they're waiting for it. That was my fear. Everything seemed to fall into place for me. If I was starting out now, my advice to anyone who wants to write is books, big stories, they feel like our children because we produce them. And when a teacher or an editor or a reader criticizes your story, boy, this was wretchedly bad, it can feel personal. Okay? The number one piece of advice I would say is don't take it personally. What you wrote becomes separate from you. A fair judgment of a story is a judgment of the story, not the person who wrote it. People who are unfair in their judgments will quite often criticize the writer personally as a human being. Oh, this person's such an idiot. Look what they wrote. Well, no, that's an unfair review. But if somebody criticizes your story, oh, this was totally unbelievable. I mean, that's sometimes hilarious because you'll get a review of your book, which is a science fiction masterpiece that has talking dinosaurs in it, and they'll say, unbelievable. Well, yeah. Of course it's unbelievable. But learn to separate criticism of your work from you. I mean, this is something that a typical high school and junior high school career will train you for anyway, because you're constantly getting marked and or deliberately criticized by your educators. Learn that it is not a criticism of you personally. It's a criticism of the work you turned in. So, and sometimes you're getting criticized because you didn't turn out the particular story that reader was hoping to get, which is not your fault. They made an assumption. You didn't fit their assumption. And in some cases, you'll be rejected by an editor, not because what you wrote wasn't great. It was, but it wasn't what they were looking for. If they're trying to publish 20-page long teenage romances that have no sex, no swearing, no violence, and you turn in a story that's too long and has sex, swearing, and violence in it, and they say, sorry, no, this isn't what we were looking for, that's because you didn't provide them with what they were looking to get. It's not a criticism of the quality of your story. It means it's unsuitable for what they needed. And so if you bear that in mind from the beginning and you don't take things personally and you think to yourself that not everything you write is going to sell, or perhaps you shouldn't submit everything you write to the same market. You should self-publish some things or put them away in a drawer because you think that story isn't quite right yet. Let me put it away in a drawer and come back to it. If you do that, you'll feel a lot happier.
Having put so many books out there into the world, you've made an impact. You have changed people, and by changing people, you have changed the world around you. There must be a number of great things about having your work in the public eye. What are some of the best experiences that you've had because of this?
Some of the best things over the years has been, okay, what you're really doing in life is making memories. So if you can build a collection of memories that you love, nice things, you win. That's a good life in which you By the way, this also applies to characters in a story. The A good story, the characters make moral choices in front of your eyes, and you can see things about the character, and the character grows by the moral choices they make. If your life is a series of making the right choice, hopefully making the right choice, and building good memories, one of the things you can accomplish by being in the public eye, and one of the things that has worked for me, is you make friends all over the world because they're people who like your stuff, or who play the same D&D game that you play, or whatever. They like what they're doing. You do what you want to do, and if you can gain friends through it and share stuff together and geek out about the same things, so you're happy with sharing the same things, in the same way that you go to see a movie and somebody else sees it and you sit down and excitedly talk about it and you both loved it. um, that's what that's all a bonus. And those are some of the things I really benefited from. And when you're in the public eye, people can call on you. Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? Do you want to participate in this charity thing? And you get chances to do a lot more things. You get invited to things. A lot of these anthologies you'll read of, mystery stories about Sherlock Holmes's twisted sister, they're invitation anthologies, but you get invited to them because you've made a name for yourself. So you get to play with a lot of people. So that's a big bonus. And guess what? In the end, that's the real reward, not the money. You will spend the money, or you won't get it, or it will be late in coming. And the time is gone. The time is in the past. All you've got left is the memories. But if you have good memories because you got to do a lot of stuff, that's the real benefit. And you feel good about yourself when you use your public platform to do good things. If you help people out who need help, if you're a friend, you're there when somebody's lonely or depressed, that feels good. You did good today. And that is the best reward.
And of course, nothing can ever be all good. What are some of the downsides that you've experienced because your work is out there?
Oh, sure. You get criticized for all sorts of things. And you have all sorts of people who are somehow expert psychologists and mind readers, and will tell the rest of the world, oh, when Greenwood wrote this, he must have been deciding he was going to murder somebody. Or Greenwood's an old fart and therefore he thinks this way, and so on. And you go, huh, you never met me. How could you know that? So you get criticism from a lot of people because you're there. You're an easy target, and you are in their mind. So yeah, you will learn that your skin has to thicken because people will take a stab at you just because you're there. In the same way that you can still be hurt as an innocent bystander because you were there. So yeah, that happens. But that's life. If you don't want to experience the pain of life, then going and living and being a hermit is a good way to do it. But it is not much of a life. If you go off by yourself and avoid all social discourse, so you're never grieving, you're never, because you made no friends, so you don't care for any losses. You are estranged from your family, so you don't care if they die. You never love anybody or form any relationships, so you can never be hurt by anybody leaving you. You're making your life a small and sorry thing in order to avoid all the discomfort. So, I would rather have tried and failed spectacularly than not to have tried at all. Because in the end, you only get the one kick at the can. You might as well kick.
Now, you've mentioned it's really important to actually do the work. That's something that we hear so many times. And you've expressed that you need to actually take that kick at the can. Aside from that, is there any other advice that you would have for new or aspiring writers?
Yeah. Write a story until you think you're finished. Okay. Resist the temptation to tweak it forever. Bring yourself to a thing where you say, yes, This story is ready to go out into the world. Then pick, hopefully by then you will have gathered friends whose reading judgment you respect, even if it's your mom or dad, but somebody, and give it to them to read and see what they think. Accept the criticism. If Don't dismiss it. If your mom says, I got really confused in the middle of who was trying to do what to whom, and you say, well, of course, mom, you don't read fantasy or you don't read science fiction. Well, of course you'd get confused. No, pay attention, because if your mom lost the thread in the middle, are there a few sentences you could put in there that would guide the reader a bit more, or give the reader a moment to take stock, or remind the reader of what's really important? Like, for instance, if somebody's gone missing and your main character is running around a giant house looking for them, and they're discovering all these dead bodies, in the middle of it, you could say, but I have to find Miriam. Or, you remind the reader, this is what my quest was in the middle of all this. Oh my God, another body, and it's still not Miriam. So you remind the reader what's going on, which gives them a sort of crutch to cling to in the middle of all this. So take the criticisms to heart. You don't have to accept every one of them, and you don't have to rewrite your masterpiece to match every criticism, because some people will have crazy criticisms and some people will have so what criticisms. But, I don't like murder mysteries, and you wrote a murder mystery, so I didn't like it. Well, that's so what? Okay, but pay attention, because if somebody got lost in the narrative, or somebody felt it was too rushed or too slow, maybe you can fix that. Later on, you will find people you can trust as editors, and you can hire them, and they tend to be good ones, tend to be expensive. Like everything else in life, you get what you pay for. So you will find editors you want to work with. If you want to find an example of that, look online for a blog called Grammargeddon with an exclamation mark. It's written by two editors, one of them very active, one of them who almost never posts. And they will cover the grammar of editing. And you could just read those for free. But I mean, and you may want to hire that particular woman who is active to edit your stuff, but you'll have to pay by the hour. And you may not have the budget for that. So that may be something you do when you become a big established writer. But anyway, have somebody else take a look at the story. And they may point out something that you just completely forgot because you're too close to the narrative. Sue Grafton, who wrote a long series of Milhone mysteries. A is for alibi, B is for, she has a book in which Kinsey Milhone, the main character, is fleeing from a murderer in an office building late at night. And she takes off her shoes and stuffs them in her coat pockets so that she'll be in her nylons, so he won't hear her walking around as she runs away from him through the building. And 8 pages later, she's out in traffic and running through the city. She's never put her shoes back on. That got past the editors, that got past the writer, that made it into print until many readers said, so why isn't she leaving bloody footprints by now? She's been running through the city for, 8 blocks, 9 blocks now without her shoes on. And the writer went, oh my gosh, so that's why you have an editor look at things. And then the next bit of research is, who would publish this? Don't send your murder mystery to a travel log publisher. If all they publish is travel books and your murder mystery takes place at home, then they're not going to publish your murder mystery. That's not what they do. Look for who would publish a book like yours. If you want to write like Stephen King, look at who Stephen King's publisher is. If you want to write like Tom Clancy or Daniel Steele or Nora Roberts, look who's publishing them. Every single publisher who has a successful writer, like one of those I've just mentioned, Those writers are expensive and they can never write fast enough. Well, okay, Stephen King and Nora Roberts can do 4 books a year, but they start churning. Like James Patterson and Tom Clancy, they get co-writers and all the books start to feel and sound the same. So they will always want more. So if you can write something sort of in the same stables, but not quite the same, then if that's what your book is, that's where you send it. Read their submission guidelines. If they want you to have an agent, find an agent. If they don't care if you have an agent, just make sure you've formatted it in the same way that a teacher might say to you, I'm not going to read any essay that's written in crayon. I'm not going to read any essay that you haven't put your name on. I'm just going to throw them away. I'm not going to mark them. Same way the editor at a publisher may say, we want them typed double space SASE, and if you don't do that, they're just going to throw them away. And by the way, that's what their legal department says they have to do if you write something set in somebody else's intellectual property. If you write a Star Trek novel, a Forgotten Realms novel, a Star Wars novel, a Lord of the Rings novel, and send it to them, they're going to throw it in the garbage without looking at it, and they're not going to respond to you because their lawyers have told them, yeah, we can't get involved in this. So do the basics of learning how and where you should put something into print. So you're aiming it at the best chance to get published, and do it. If you don't know what the best chance is, self-publish through Amazon and then send copies of the published book to publishers. See if you can get them interested. But the main thing is finish your book first. Because if you're a first-time author, walking into a publisher's or seeing them at a convention saying, hi, I've got this idea for a great 18-book series on the rise and fall of Canada. It's going to be set in the future where Canada's going to have an empire where we conquer the entire globe. And it's going to have passion. It's going to have romance. It's going to have huge fights. The publisher is going to say, what have you published so far? And you say, well, nothing yet. Well, they're just going to laugh because they have to see the finished book, to know that you can finish a book. So finish the book first. If you're a first-time writer, you have to be selling a finished story, whether it's a short story, novella, or novel, or a trilogy. You got to finish it first. Later on, you can get to the luxury of, hey, I got this great idea. Do you want to publish it? Sure. But that's for the Stephen Kings of this world. For the rest of us, write the book first, get it finished. For one thing, there's the self-satisfaction of finishing the book yourself. Even if you never get it published, you saw it through to the end. You told your story.
Now, as we draw things to a close, there may be some people who aren't as familiar with your work, or are just learning about you for the first time right now. If they want to know more about you or your writing, what should they look for? The Forgotten Realms? Your work on dmsguild.com? Should they look into the Storm Talons universe? Or something completely different?
There's very little Storm Talon stuff out there. I've done one steampunk novel. It's called The Iron Assassin. I've done a series of novels, now increasingly hard to find. The Kingless Land and its sequel, the Aglerta books with Tor, which are not Realms. I've done about 40 Realms books, one way or the other. If you just want to see my writing, see me having fun, and you're on Twitter, just look me up at the Edverse, all run together, of course, into one word, TheEdverse, at the Edverse. And every day I answer Realms lore questions, but I also publish doggerel, short rhyming poetry that is just for fun and is usually a parody of a famous poem or rock song lyric or folk song lyric, and I just write one for fun, but I turn it into something fantasy usually. And I'm writing ongoing fiction about Lord Wolf, which is usually only a few tweets long each day, and it's a fantasy courtier who is incredibly rude to his king, and the kingdom has been invaded, and The king, he, and two other courtiers are on the run together, and they are having adventures. And it's mainly an excuse for him to say rude, cutting things. It's sort of like watching a performance of Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest or something of the sort, where people are spending all their time being cuttingly rude to each other. So and that's just writing for fun. So that's a good way to say, oh, who is this guy and what does he do? This is what he does for fun.
And I just want to thank Ed Greenwood for being here with us today. Again, you can find him on Twitter at the Edverse. That is at TheEdverse at the Edverse. He's writing there every day. There's an entire story being formed that you can go back and read through. If you have questions, he'll respond to you there. And of course, he's doing a lot of work on dmsguild.com. So if you are interested in learning more about him, please look him up there. And again, Ed, thanks so much for stopping by today. It was a pleasure, a privilege, and a delight. I am Michael Barltrop at whatbinder.com. Please feel free to like and subscribe to these videos to see more upcoming interviews and other content on this site.